You're listening to the official Minnesota Wild podcast, presented by Acrisure.
It's Wild Weekly on the Fan.
Pass it from Kaprizov, shoots and scores.
Now here to talk about the Minnesota Wild and the NHL. From the Wild, Kevin Fallness. And from the Fan, Brandon Molesky.
Good evening. Welcome to KFAN Wild Weekly. Brandon Molesky along with Kevin Fallness talking Minnesota Wild hockey for the next half hour. The number one team in the National Hockey League after their 5-4 shootout win last night in Utah. Kevin, I know you were not in Utah. You stay home here in Minnesota. But what did Tom and Joe and the rest of the crew think about seeing a game in Utah for the first time?
I think they were impressed. Tom looks at it from the very narrow angle of how it affects him, and and he loved the broadcast booth. He says the view from the broadcast booth is now number one in the National Hockey League, and he's Edmonton sucks. I've seen Edmonton, I've seen Colorado. They both suck. It feels like you're in a different time zone. He says because this is basically a basketball building, from his standpoint, fantastic sight lines. I know, and we saw this at Target Center when the North Stars at one point played there for a little bit, and we know that the basketball setup is not conducive to the best angles for hockey, and that's kind of the problem they're going to have there at the Delta Center. But he said outside of all of that stuff, the way the ownership has treated the employees, the way the team is, the surroundings there, it feels like they've found a new home. And if there was ever a team that needed a fresh coat of paint, it was the former Arizona Coyotes. It's got to feel like, for the guys that were on the ice with Arizona last year in the desert that have made the move to Utah, it has to feel like they can breathe again.
Yes. And, an entertaining game last night, but kind of a weird game, Kevin, right? First period, the Wild dominated play. They controlled the play, yet they're down 1-0. They rally back with that Husnudinov goal and start getting going offensively as the game progresses. But then, the penalty kill let them down a couple times from Clayton Keller. And, Gustafsson on that fourth goal in the third period, the go-ahead goal for Utah, I thought that was one that he should have obviously secured. A weird game, and then, Marco Rossi does it again, late game heroic, scores the goal, forces it overtime, and they end up winning the shootout.
Yeah, this one was tailor-made for a disappointing outcome, and the fact that, yes, they did battle back, and like you said, you got a pair of goals 36 seconds apart from Kaprizov and Husnudinov. You figure that's where they're going to put the pedal down, but the Coyotes wouldn't go away, especially Clayton Keller scoring a pair of power play goals in that third period, and then that softie by Gustafsson when he gave it up to Valimaki, follows his own rebound and burns Gustafsson to take the lead at 4-3 midway through that third period. You think, this is one that's going to get away from them. But, of course, it doesn't. They get the late goal from Marco Rossi, who, is having just a rejuvenated season here for Minnesota. And then they get it done in the shootout. It was a fun night. To be honest, I didn't expect it to be fun, especially after the first period when they're down 1-0, despite outshooting the Coyotes 17-5. But, man, they made that an entertaining third period. And the best part of all of it, they got both points.
Well, and the best part, too, is, Kevin, I think we've been wondering, hey, are the Wild legit? Are the Wild for real? They've now been doing this without some key players, right? Jonas Brodin, a top four defenseman, has been out for a while. Matt Zuccarello on your first line with Kaprizov, but a top six forward, been out for a while. Joel Eriksson, your number one center, top six forward. He's been out, and, they're still, I know they've had not the strongest competition recently with Utah and Anaheim Friday night, but they're still winning without some major players. And last year, I don't think that team could have overcome those types of injuries.
Yeah, that's the incredible part about that whole thing. They did get Jakub Lauko back last night in a third line role, playing mostly with Gaudreau and Trenyan. But the fact that they are getting these results and are number one in the National Hockey League via points percentage and tied for the top spot in the Central Division, tied with Winnipeg, although they played 2 fewer games, it's incredible because they have cobbled together an incredible start to this season. And there's no reason to think that they can't keep this going the way they've been getting it done, and especially as guys start coming back. It feels like Brodin and Zuccarello are on the horizon. I don't think it's tomorrow night against Edmonton, but probably on this homestand, you're going to see them. Hopefully, Joel Eriksson isn't too far off in the distance, and you get this team back to full strength, and watch out.
The Edmonton game tomorrow night, I find this one interesting because, I feel like, Kevin, the Wild have handled the Edmonton Oilers and have handled Connor McDavid as well as anybody. I'm not going to say they've stopped them, but in terms of just kind of containing Connor McDavid, and a lot of it is because they have great mobile defensemen, right? Spurgeon's mobile, Brodin's mobile, Faber's mobile. At least tomorrow night they're on home ice and they get a little bit more favorable matchups. But even when they've been in Edmonton, because you have depth at the defensive position with guys that are mobile on multiple lines, have been able to contain them. But, tomorrow night, if they don't have Brodin, that's one guy down in your top four that's pretty darn good against Connor McDavid.
Yeah, I think Connor McDavid doesn't like seeing the Minnesota Wild because of Jonas Brodin. So we'll see how the Wild can handle him. The Oilers are actually playing pretty well. They won again last night. They took down the Lightning, doubled them up 2-1. So they've won 3 in a row and 6 of their last 7. So watch out. That's going to be a tough game to start off the homestand.
It is. 5-game homestand starts tomorrow night. They get Philadelphia on Saturday. Vegas comes into town on Sunday, and then Florida and that Utah club we just saw last night, they come back here next Friday. So 5-game homestand for your Minnesota Wild. It all starts tomorrow night against the Edmonton Oilers. 7:30 start, 7:15 right here on the Fan. You can hear it on the Wild Radio Network. We'll talk to the television analyst for the Minnesota Wild, Wes Walz, next on the other side of this break.
Boldy left point with a pass. It ricocheted free, came right back to him. Boldy now forced it to Johansson, right circle, thrown in front for a shot. He scored! Marco Rossi is tied the game! 43.2 seconds left, and the Wild have pulled even at 4.
Joe Dunn on the call last night. Marco Rossi with the game-tying goal. The Wild win in a shootout. They win in Utah. Their first time ever in Utah, 5-4 last night. You heard that game right here on the Fan. I'm Brandon Molesky. Kevin Fallness from the Wild Radio Network is with me as well, and we're joined by Wes Walz, former Minnesota Wild center, now an analyst for FanDuel Sports Network. Wes, thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it as always. What did you think about the game last night? Pretty entertaining.
It was, but this is full disclosure, boys. I watched the highlights this morning of all the goals. I didn't go through it yet, quite yet, but I was at a high school game last night. Watching kind of off and on my phone, leaning up against the plexiglass, watching the Eastridge Raptor girls beat the Onis out in Stillwater. So I did watch it, but I had one eye on each game, so I didn't watch it as closely as I normally would have. But I'll get at it a little bit later today. I watched the highlights here this morning of all the goals, and obviously, I knew that Marco Rossi had scored late, and when it was 4-3 and the Wild were chasing at the end of the game, I thought, well, it's going to be here goes 2 games in a row in regulation. The Wild are going to be are going to lose. It's finally going to happen 2 games straight, but just the determination and just ability to step up late in games. Marco Rossi, I think that's the second time he scored in the last minute. And it seems like each time Marco has scored late in the game to tie the games up. I think we did it in Calgary as well. They've been able to get that extra point in overtime too. Last night was a shootout, but yeah, just the beat goes on for the Minnesota Wild guys. It's just it's been an incredible. I can't even call it a start anymore. It's been an incredible, couple months here to start the season.
Sorry to cut Kevin off here, but I do have to ask you: did you throw your hat on the ice last night at that Eastridge game?
I did not. I did not. My daughter scored the first 3 goals in like the first 8 minutes of the game. It was just one of those special nights, and I was actually standing behind the net. She scored all 3 goals on, so I don't know if that had anything to do with it. I kind of spent a lot of time behind the net since she hadn't scored like that before, so it was nice to see her get the hat trick, and Eastridge has had a tough time scoring goals this year, so did not throw a hat, did not have a hat on, but if I would have had a hat on, I probably would not have thrown it anyway. That's just kind of how I roll.
Yep.
How does Coach Walz celebrate something like that with his daughter? I know not Coach Walz. How does Daddy Walz celebrate that? Coach Walz, I'm sure, is very stoic and chewing his gum and trying to keep his hands in his pocket. But how about the father Walz?
Daddy Walz is not much different. I don't really show a whole lot of emotion at any point. I never did when I played, even when I scored goals. That's just was my demeanor and how I was, and there were times I wish I was different, like some of the kids today. But no, I just stood on the glass and watched the girls celebrate not far from me. A couple of them were celebrating and kind of like laughing at me standing behind the glass. So I felt like I was kind of in the huddle behind the net with the girls. But it was a special night for the Wild and a special night for the Walz family with the hat trick from my daughter.
All right, well, Wes, it's December 11th. Did you ever envision the Minnesota Wild would have the most points in the NHL at the December 11th mark?
No, I don't think anybody envisioned this, but I really did truly believe that we were going to be a lot better than people gave us credit for before the season started. I want to say the only pundit that I heard, national pundit, out of all the, as supposed experts in North America when the season started was Bruce Boudreau, was the only guy I remember that had said on the NHL Network that he thought the Wild had a chance to finish in the top three. And I know a couple of the other experts were kind of not rolling their eyes, but they were a little surprised by what Bruce had said. And he followed that up after saying that statement, talked about how many injuries the Wild had last year and the fact that they did not have Jared Spurgeon at all last year. He had mentioned that Jared played probably 20 games, but he was a shell of who he really was. And Bruce saw him. Bruce coached him. And we know what we have with Jared Spurgeon. I don't think most of the net people around the National Hockey League really know the importance that Jared Spurgeon brings to this organization. Bruce does. That's why he said it. And I would agree with Bruce.
That said, coming out of last season, there were a bunch of people. Take message boards and fan reaction for what it's worth, because I know they live on emotion. But there were a number of guys on this roster that, if they had their way, would have been crumpled up in the ball and thrown on the heap. Gustafsson, Gaudreau, go right down the list. Marco Rossi was probably one of them that they said, okay, we've seen enough, a bust. A lot of these guys have taken incredible steps forward, but the guy I want to ask you about is Marcus Johansson. That dude looks like a completely different player than the guy we watched last year, Walzy.
Well, he was definitely going into the season one of the guys that needed to step up, along with Freddie Gaudreau and Gustafsson, guys internally. I mean, obviously, we know the cap situation the Wild had. Billy could have went out and probably made a bunch of moves this summer with 80 cents on the dollar because maybe of desperation, but he decided not to and sit tight and spend a few dollars on Jakob Trenin. That was really the only move that the Wild made, and the Wild just needed the guys that internally, the guys that had down years needed to step up and have good years. And Billy Guerin bet it. He bet that those guys would, and Marcus Johansson was one of those guys. Obviously, we know he's in a contract year too, the numbers have been obviously showing up on the score sheets. Johansson had 3 points last night, but even when he was playing the beginning of the season, typical fan just basically looks at the box score a lot of times and sees that he's got like 1 or 2 assists maybe in the first 13 games, but the eye test was telling me he was having a lot more impact even early in the season. But when you get a veteran player like Marcus Johansson, even though you haven't played or haven't scored a whole lot, and you've got the confidence of your coach just to tell you to continue to do the right things, and you've been in this league long enough, if you continue to do the right things, and Marcus Johansson has, even when he wasn't putting numbers up the first 10 or 15 games of the season, he's been around long enough to know that if he continues to do the right things, the points and numbers are going to start to come. And obviously put on a clinic last night with 3 points, but just his overall game has just been so solid. So again, he's playing for his life too. I think he's 33 years old. He's got a lot of tread on the tires. And he wants another contract, and he's been playing great for the Wild, and let's hope that continues.
How about another guy who's kind of emerged after a bad season last year, Freddie Gaudreau? I look at the stats right now. 5th on the Wild in scoring with 5 goals, 9 assists, 14 points. What's changed with his game from last year? Because he did not produce very much last year.
That guy, Brandon, needed to get off to a good start. I know Freddie a little bit. I don't know him that well, but I know enough to know from guys that I've spoken to around the locker room, he's really hard on himself. He's a guy that cares so much, and I think last year, he wasn't scoring, and the team was losing, and I think, he heard his name in the media a lot, and I just think it all just kind of, continued to snowball for him, and it just kind of took him into a downward spiral. And for him to get off to a great start, like if there was one guy on the roster, guys, that needed a goal or two in the first 7 or 8 games, it was that guy. And they actually did get off to a bit of a slow start, but I think he got 2 goals, maybe his 6th or 7th game into the season, and then his game has really taken off. I've been watching him in the face-off circle. His face-off percentage is kind of the highest it's ever been. It's up near 53, 54%, which as a former centerman, like when you're winning a lot of faceoffs too, it's amazing how that can bring confidence to you as a centerman as well too. And I'm actually going to ask Freddie when I run into him tomorrow, because I noticed watching some tape when he's coming into faceoff circles, it seems like he's changed the angle of his, like he's doing some things with his legs that are a little bit differently that allows him to get maybe a little bit deeper in his stance. It's almost like he's coming in more knee knocked than he did more bent over at the hip. And I'm wondering, just from watching some tape on him on the faceoff dot, that's, maybe there's nothing there, but I was going to ask him next time I see him. So some success on the faceoff circle too can bring you some confidence. But again, he's one of, like Marcus Johansson, he's one of those guys that needed to step up and play well. And all these guys, there's not one guy who's not playing well. Like, can you guys go up and down the roster? Declan Chisholm, like, can you guys come up with one guy that's really, really had a tough start to the season? I can't find anybody in that roster. Not one guy. And this is what we saw 2-3 years ago when the team put up 113 points or whatever they did. Just everybody was clicking on all cylinders, and the fact that the Wild are doing this, having played nearly the most road games of any team in the NHL, and obviously the dead cap situation we have right now is it's been remarkable.
Yeah, a third of the way into the season, and they're number one in the NHL in points percentage. I'm going to ask you a two-part question. Your answer cannot be Kirill Kaprizov for either of these. Who do you enjoy watching most on this roster, and which of these Wild players is most like vintage Wes Walz? Again, you can't answer Kirill Kaprizov for either of those questions.
I don't think he was going to answer Kaprizov on the second part there, Kevin.
No, I wouldn't go that far. The guy I'm enjoying watching the most right now is Jake Middleton.
There you go.
And I've said this on the air. I outside of Kirill Kaprizov and Gustafsson, the way those two have played, for me, the guy that's having the most impact night in, night out through the first third of the season is Jake Middleton. He's number 3 for me. He has been incredible. His gaps in the neutral zone are just ridiculous. He's broken up more plays with his gap control in the neutral zone, turning pucks the other way. The way he's defending down low below the dots, he's got a different edge about him that I haven't seen. Like I'm watching his demeanor in his own zone, like he doesn't want to get scored on. And I'm not saying last year he didn't want to get scored on, but I think last year he was in the defensive zone thinking about the offensive zone. Like his mind was not in the right spot. And maybe that could have been last year with Jake, just because, Spurgeon was out of the lineup. We're having difficult time scoring. He got caught up the ice way, way too often. And again, it's only because he cares, but he's just playing like an animal defensively. And that's really what's led to most of his offense. I mean, I don't know, guys, somebody that on the Wild roster that reminds.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe Freddie, but you got somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, Freddie's a right-handed player for sure. I mean, if there was one guy, I would probably say Marcus Johansson, maybe a little bit more, although he's a winger. I mean, we probably skate similar. I think you'd probably say Freddie because he's a right-handed player. But, between Freddie and actually both those guys, even Ryan Hartman, I guess I didn't really play the power play guys, so I can't really say Ryan Hartman. I didn't get any power play time at all when I played under Jacques Lemaire. So in more of a checking role, I would probably say Freddie Gaudreau, but again, I probably skated a little bit better than Freddie, so I don't really see anybody on that kind of resembles me, to be perfectly honest.
Well, final question for you, Wes. I think at the beginning of the year I threw out a guy that reminded me of you, and that would be Husnudinov to a certain extent. I know you're right-handed, he's left-handed, but in terms of his skating ability and his speed and killing penalties. That being said, I know he had the big goal last night, but defensively he seems like he's out of position at times. What have you noticed from Husnudinov, who's still obviously a young player?
Yeah, he's not he's far from a finished product defensively. He has, I think a lot of the things that he gets done defensively are just more from his just compete level and how great a skater he is. Like he's not in perfect position all the time, but he's able to recover because he is an elite skater. So that's always nice to have in your back pocket. He scored his first goal there the other day. I don't know. He's been okay. I still think there's I mean, I watch him in practice, guys. I'm down there a lot, and I watch some of the things that he does in practice. Like, he has some ability offensively. And we saw it with a snapshot there yesterday. Like, maybe he's just one of those guys that needed to watch a go into the net, other than a practice, and actually feel good about. So I am really interested to watch how his game moves forward here, especially over the next 4 games on the offensive side of things. He's not perfect defensively, but he's very, very sound defensively, and but he's been a nice find, and he hasn't hurt the team at all because the guy brings it every night. You never have to worry. You don't go after a game and think, man, who's Nadinov really? I wonder if there's a chance he's going to be a healthy scratch here tonight. So that says a lot about the guy, Brandon and Kevin. When you've scored 1 goal in a season, and there's been no talk of whether you're going to be a healthy scratch as a 4th-line player, tells you what John Hines thinks about him as a player, that he's a very responsible player. And when you have responsible players that you can play on the road when not having last change, and the Wild have had a lot of games on the road, that says a lot about what Coach Hines thinks about who's Nadinov. But I'm excited to see what he does offensively here over the next 4 or 5 games when he's got a little bit of confidence.
Wes, love chatting with you. Thanks for your time as always. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care, boys.
See you, Walzy.
All right, Wes Walz from FanDuel Sports Network, former Minnesota Wild great. Kevin, your squad's at home here for the next week and change. 5 straight games at home, beginning with the Edmonton Oilers tomorrow night. Yeah, a tough matchup for sure to kick off the homestand, but it should be fun. Pre-game at 7:15. Puck drops at, I assume, about 7:38 live from the Al Shaver press box. He's Kevin Fallness. I'm Brandon Molesky. Thank you so much for listening to KFAN Wild Weekly tonight. We'll talk to you next week.
For an extraordinary advantage in sports, you need a game plan. For an extraordinary advantage everywhere else, all you need is Acrisure. With a high-tech human approach to insurance, cybersecurity, and more, Acrisure helps you take care of what you care about. That makes winning easy. See what Acrisure's extraordinary advantage can do for you at Acrisure.com.